Hello, I'm Alfie and welcome to Culture of Coal, Wakefield Stories. Today I'm joined by Denis Doody, a former strike in mining from Fitzwilliam in Wakefield. In July 1984, disturbances broke out in the pit village of Fitzwilliam, and Denis was arrested as part of the Fitzwilliam Nine. At the time, he was a young striking miner, and he joins me today to talk about his experiences of the time and his thoughts on the 40th anniversary of the miners' strike. Hi Dennis, please could you tell me a little bit please tell me a little bit about your background. Where and when did you start working in the mining industry, or how were you related to the mining industry?
I'm from Fitzwilliam. I'm 70-year-old this year. I started working in the mining industry in 1969 at South Kirby Colliery, and I worked for several years in mining industry and several years in construction industry. When I left the mining industry, I went on to become a manager for an housing association. Then I became the regional secretary for UCAT, the construction trade union up in the northeast. So I spent 4 years up in Newcastle.
And when did you finish?
I finished in 1987.
So what were your memories then of the period when the strike began in Fitzwilliam? Do you remember the day it began? Do you remember what happened and how people responded in Fitzwilliam?
Yeah, I can remember when the strike was called. I can remember the before the strike was called, when we were on overtime ban and the appointment of Ian McGregor. And obviously Thatcher had become the Prime Minister in 1979. So we expected at some stage that the coal industry would come under the same attack as the steel industry. It literally was only a matter of time. And when the strike was called in March 1984, our village responded very, very well. Many people from Fitzwilliam were actively involved in picketing. I think out of the 15 vans that left South Kirby Colliery, 11 of them were from Fitzwilliam. So it gives an indication of the depth of the feeling and the strength of the feeling and the support that the strike had.
And what was like before? Because do you remember the 72 and 74 strikes prior?
Yeah, I'd left the industry in 1971, and I went back into it in 1974. My brothers were on strike in 1972 and 1974. And back then we had, I was supporting the strike. I've been a trade union since I was 15 years old. My first trade union was the National Union of Mine Workers. And obviously I was in support of my brothers who took industrial action. Again, the strike were well supported in Fitzwilliam and in the area. Generally, it received a lot of support. And both them disputes was, as you know, they ended up in victory for the NUM.
And so what were your experiences in Fitzwilliam at the time of the strike? Did you go and picket, or is there anything that sticks in your mind, the way the police came into the village or how you were treated?
I went picketing from day one. The first bits that I picketed were all up in Colliery in Nottinghamshire, and that was a few days after David Gareth Jones had been killed there. And I picketed all through the dispute right up to it being called off on the Sunday evening, 1985. I, along with a lot of other people, were involved in that incident in Fitzwilliam. And I think that, the reasons behind that were that the police knew that Fitzwilliam was a stronghold, a militancy. The miners and the people of Fitzwilliam, the community in general, were very supportive of the lads who were on strike and the lasses who were on strike, because there weren't only men that were on strike. Some women who worked in the pit canteen were also on strike. And we'd had several run-ins with the police. The battles were coming very, very closer to home. They weren't only confined to parts of Nottinghamshire or wherever. Were picketing at Orgreave and anywhere else. They're starting to come into the villages, especially militant villages. And Fitzwilliam, like South Emsall and like Hatfield and Armthorpe, were villages where miners in those villages were leading the dispute in many instances. It wasn't a surprise that when the police invaded our village on July the 9th, they'd already started plainclothes policemen were driving up and down the village, telling people they needed to stop in their house, they were going to get visited and one thing and another, and told to stop at home, and harassing people and badgering people. So we went to the police station in Emsworth to to protest. They said that this had to stop, and the response was that it didn't stop. It got worse, and we finally had an invasion of the village by police from all over West Yorkshire, and running battles took place all through the evening and through the night. It resulted in 9 people getting arrested. Now, one of them, my brother, were also arrested. My cousin were arrested, and it left a scar. People were already bitter towards the police, and it didn't fetch any harmony. And it didn't repulse us or repel us. We're still prepared to do whatever necessary to win that dispute. So whatever actions I took on that night, it consolidated his opinion about what we're up against. We weren't just up against the National Coal Board. We were up against the police. We were up against the judiciary. We were up against the press. We were up against the whole apparatus of the state, and that became very, very clear relatively early on in that dispute.
And what happened after you got arrested? What happened to the 9 people in Fitzwilliam?
One of the lads got sent to jail. Peter Hurst, he was sent to jail for 6 months. They brought a stipendiary magistrate in, which was unusual. There weren't no local magistrates. In fact, somebody I think were from Leeds. They had no knowledge of mining communities and no idea of the culture that existed there. No idea of the history. He was there to do a job, and his job was to mete out as much punishment as he could. I think there were 2 of us who were found not guilty. The case that they put against me was absurd, and it wouldn't have stood up anyway. And the case against the others were equally absurd, but it was in a magistrate's court, so we didn't have the chance to go before a judge and a jury. The only jury was the stipendiary magistrate, and he was a bigger thug than the police. Like I said, one lad, Peter Hurst, he received 6 months in jail. I think 5 more people ended up with suspended prison sentences. Or 6 people, and 2 of us were found not guilty.
And how did that make you feel for the rest of the strike after? Because that, did you say that happened in July? That's quite early on. How did it make you feel going on for the rest of the strike? Did it sort of make you determined to continue with it?
More determined, more resolved, more determined that we were going to win that dispute, and we were prepared to do whatever was necessary to win that strike. It scarred the village. There's no 2 ways about it. The community was seriously damaged by it, but were bruised, but not beaten. And it hardened people's resolve. It increased picketing. It increased the resentment towards the police. The police never got a day's or a minute's or a second's peace while they were in Fitzwilliam. They were attacked on numerous occasions.
What happened? First, before I go on to that, what was your family's experiences of the strike then at the time?
All of my brothers were on strike, as well as me and my younger brother, who were arrested that night in Fitzwilliam. All of my mother's sons were arrested during that dispute, and I'm the second youngest of 8 kids. So they were all arrested for one issue or another. The family were close knit, like most mining communities are. We live in a tight community where people are loyal to each other, and everybody were equally determined to see the dispute through to its conclusion.
So what happened when the strike ended? Because it obviously must have been a horrendous experience for the community. Women against closures, the sense of community that you'd built and the resilience. What sort of happened? Did that continue? Did you have that sense of community still, or was it just a feeling of defeat and a feeling?
It was a blow. I'll be absolutely honest with that. The strike was called off on a Sunday evening, and I was with some other lads who were on strike, and it was a blow. We never expected it. The South Wales area, the National Union of Mine Workers, where there were no scabs in South Wales, submitted a resolution to go back to work without a deal, without a resolution to the conflict, and it was seconded by the Durham area NUM, and it was baffled by it, especially the fact that the South Wales area NUM, there were no scabs in Wales, and we were undefeated on that evening. We never felt that we were staring defeat in face. We were determined to carry on. So it was a shock. It was a shock that the union took the decision that it did. I've later learned since that there were dark forces at work that brought that decision about to return to work. Because bear in mind, we were leaving the sacked lads behind us. All the people who were sacked were going to remain sacked. We were returning to work without a settlement, which in fact, in my opinion, what a submission. What the impact did it have on community after? We were devastated. But we're still today, we're still as tight-knit as we were back then 40 years ago. We had an event in March of this year to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the miners' strike in the Pit Club in Fitzwilliam. We were absolutely chock-a-block. Hundreds of people there turned up. Arthur Scargill spoke. Rose Hunter from the Women Against Pit Closure spoke. I chaired the meeting. John Dunn from the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign spoke. There were miners come down from Scotland. People came from Nottingham, the Nottinghamshire miners who were on strike. People came up from London. People over from Liverpool. A fella came all the way from Holland to participate in the meeting. And it was, a tremendous event.
And what was the Women Against Pit Closure's involvement in Fitzwilliam? Did you have
Phenomenal.
Phenomenal.
And the lady who kicked the I don't like calling them soup kitchens because we never got fed soup. We got fed wholesome food. What a woman called Linda Turgles, who I'll give you the name, and she got together with other women and the fellas, and they set up the food kitchen, and they were also involved in picketing and other activities. My partner, who she worked at canteen at Frickley Colliery, she was arrested. One of the other lads' wives, she was arrested as well up in Fitzwilliam. So they played a big role, and nationally they played a phenomenal role. And they held the community together. They really held it together. They were the glue that bound the people together, because you knew that when you'd been picketing, whatever the outcome of that day's picketing was, that you're coming back home and they were, despite the fact that we had nothing, that you were going to get fed a hot meal.
What was the feeling like at Fitzwilliam when you went back, and then in the 1980s, following that? Because I think some people maybe have the impression that the sort of mining industry ended in 1985, but that's not true. It continued on for until 2015 in Kellingley. But what was the feeling like afterwards in Fitzwilliam?
Well, once the pit closure programme kicked in, the impact of it were devastating. You could only look at places like Normanton, where you're from, Castleford. The only growth industry in Fitzwilliam in the mid-80s and the early 90s were heroin. That's the social consequences of what took place, where we went from a place where there were almost full employment to a place where the industry had gone. It was wiped off the face of the earth. And for several years, the entire area looked gloomy. You could drive through South Amstel and see boarded shop windows, and it looks awful. It looked like the description what they use in America is like the Rust Belt. It were in an economic decline. But like the proverbial phoenix, the community's risen out the ashes, and we're still here, and we're still as resolute as we always were. Or as occupations have changed. I mean, I'm retired now, but I don't ever I feel more disappointed than defeated. Plus, I believe that we could have won that dispute.
Sort of a bit of a side question, but how do you? I know you mentioned about the reunion for the 40th anniversary, but over the years, how have you sort of kept mining heritage alive in Fitzwilliam and surrounding area? I mean, what happened to your banner, for example?
Well, I don't know if you know this, but we had a pit in its own village called Kinsley Drift. And before it was Kinsley Drift, it was called Emsworth Colliery. Now, they were never in Emsworth, I think we were never in Kinsley. The pit was in Fitzwilliam. But when they shut the pit in the 1960s, they reopened it up as Kinsley Drift. And it was to find employment for miners from Barnsley. But local miners who'd worked at that pit had an opportunity to go back. Whether they worked at South Kirby or Frickley or Kellingley, they could go back to Kinsley Drift. So, we did have quite a few people who were from Fitzwilliam working at Kinsley Drift, but the main bulk of the workforce came from Newmiller Dam. colliery which is shut, and from Rockingham Colliery in Barnsley. So, there weren't local people who worked there. The vast majority of them were not from Fitzwilliam. And in terms of, we still attended rallies. We attended the David Jones, John Green Memorial Lectures. We attended the Alfie Truth and Justice Campaign meetings. We still attended the Miners' Gala. We barely missed one. So as heritage and as history is still intact. Apart from that, the more politicised of us attended rallies against the war in Iraq. We attended rallies against the poll tax and all different sorts of events. We were still as politicised as we were all those years ago and still are today.
You sort of talked a little bit about the impact that the closure of the collieries has had on the local area, but how do you think and why do you think it's in... I mean, firstly, how can we remember the industry in Wakefield district, do you think? And also, why do you think it's important that we do that and we keep that heritage alive?
Well, it's part of his heritage. It's part of his culture. We have a mining museum, and unfortunately, McGregor and Thatcher made the mining industry into the museum society she accused us of trying to introduce in Britain. All we have now in terms of any physical manifestations or representation of that art industry is you'll see it in every pit village. If you go through Charleston, if you go through Normanton, if you go in, you'll see the winding wheel. After the winding wheel, it's almost like a tombstone. Personally, don't my own personal tributes to industry and tributes to the legacy and to the role that miners played and the National Union Mine Workers played in the labour and trade union movement is that I still participate in disputes today. I've stood on the picket lines a long way out of Scarga of the RMT dispute at Wakefield Westgate Station. I stood with Unite workers down at the bus depot in Wakefield when they're on strike, with the CWU workers at Normanton on the industrial estate when they were on strike, with the ambulance workers over in Cass when the ambulance dispute went on, with the Royal College of Nursing in Leeds and the junior doctors in Leeds at the Beckett's hospital. We've kept us in. Not just me. There's been other people as well. It's in us blood. I come from a family whose grandparents were on strike in 1926, whose great grandparents were evicted from the homes in Kinsley. I knew as a child growing up about the 1926 general strike, about the Kinsley lockouts, about the Featherstone massacres. Part and parcel of our heritage, our culture, and our history. We're proud of that, and we'll never ever let that go. If generations yet to come, I'm hoping that they will retain that knowledge and pride as much as we do.
What you say really about the sort of social consequences of it, of the strike and the aftermath of the pit closures, I think it really links into something else you were saying then about the trade union movement and maybe the loss in some ways of a large sort of trade union workforce in the area, which built a sense of collective sort of community, didn't it, and solidarity, and where people worked together and came to talk and discuss things such as politics. But the mining industry also provided other things, didn't it? Recreational activities, social welfare organisations, and then I suppose when the pits went, it also killed that, the loss of that trade union culture and the loss of that social and recreational aspect of it.
Well, it did. I was only discussing this yesterday, that the National Union Mine Workers were more than a trade union. It were unique. The National Union Mine Workers were a community. It's not like, I don't mean this disrespectfully, anybody that remembers Unite down at Argos in Normanton, where the workforce were probably from 10, 20 different villages and different towns. We all lived in the same village. We all knew each other. We're all families. We're all interrelated. We for example, like Mick Appleyard's role. I'll just give you an example of Mick's role after the strike, but also during the strike. He carried out literally thousands of compensation claims for miners who were suffering from pneumoconiosis, bronchitis emphysema, vibration white finger. And they were still doing that after the strike. The role never disappeared, because the legacy of the mining industry is that it left a lot of people suffering from occupational ill health. Mick still carried out that function, and there's other individuals still carry out that function. The social welfare side of it has gone, because we used to have his own, Emsworth Quarry had its own brass band. It had its own boxing club. We've still got his own bowling green, and we've still got 2 football teams who play in the village who still go under that name. So we haven't completely disappeared. We're still here, and we still retain a sense of pride and a sense of identity, who we are and where we come from. The legacy that we have, we believe that we're one of the finest trade unions that's ever graced this country, and we still believe to this day that other trade unions. The consequence of Alfie, if you cut to the chase, when that dispute was defeated in 1984-85, what followed? What a massive trashing of all standards that the working man and woman of this country would expect. The end of nationalised industries, the end of regulated employment, the introduction of deregulation, of all the nasty consequences that come. We're living in an unrestrained market economy where people are cast aside and at the drop of an hat. And that's what Thatcherism introduced, and that's what we're living today. There were no food banks in Fitzwilliam and Kinsley in the 1960s. There weren't 8 million people on hospital waiting lists in the 1970s. There were no people going to food banks and warm banks and closed banks that didn't exist. That is the legacy of the defeat of 1984-85, what we're living with today.
Yeah, and I think if this podcast can achieve anything for people, and it's talked about, I've got all sorts of different people I've spoke to, is that it's a reminder of the type of the society that existed and what we had in the sense of community, and that it doesn't have to be that way, and it hasn't gone away. There's lots of people doing good things to try and keep it alive and to foster that sense of community. And to remember the things that people did, like yourself, and who stood on a picket line, and the women who fed communities. I think that's a very important thing, and I hope that a lot of younger people who maybe don't know as much about it, myself, it's taken me a long time to learn, and I'm still learning about like the mining industry and the things that have gone on, and that's sort of part of the enjoyment of doing this. So, and I just hope that it's something that people take pleasure in listening to, but also maybe learn.
Yeah, can I just say this here, Alfie? This is especially I'm targeting your age group when I say this. I want to compare the opportunities that I had. How old are you?
23.
What I had as a 23-year-old is what you've got as a 23-year-old today, or your generation. Not necessarily you, but your peer group. When I was 23 years old, we had practically full employment in this country. There were no such thing as hospital waiting lists as such. I could see my doctor the same day. We had home helps. We had meals on wheels. We had old folks' homes. We had old folks' community centres. We had a fabric of society that Thatcher destroyed, that's no longer in existence. My standard of living were better than many 23-year-olds when I was 23 than the 23-year-olds of today. My job opportunities were far greater than yours. The chances of me buying an house were far greater than most 23-year-olds. I had regular employment, full-time employment. We'd never heard of an agency. We'd never heard of the temporary contracts. We'd never heard of 0 hours contracts. They didn't exist. We lived in a stable society, and Thatcher and Thatcherism wrecked and destroyed that.
Yeah, I think it's had a corrosive effect on large parts of Wakefield. Any pit community in Wakefield can sort of recognise that and think about that. But especially in Fitzwilliam and Hensworth and South Hempsall, it's something that people really feel today. We're living with the 40-year legacy of it, and I think that is very, very true. Everything you've said, it rings very true. But looking to the future, how do you think we can maybe use the past and use the memory of it to do good and to build community? You talked about the anniversary celebration you had and how many people came, and you're also celebrating that heritage, aren't you? And in one, you're sort of celebrating that really you're still here. You're still here, and you're still keeping that community alive, despite all the things that have been done to actually destroy the pit itself as a physical sort of place and object. And is there anything you think that is important that people remember or do to keep that heritage alive?
Well, I think that the spirit of resistance is important, and you find it more in mining villages than you do in non-mining villages and informal mining communities rather than communities that weren't based around mining or any specific industry. But I think the youth of today have got one hell of a fight in their hands, because the situation is not getting any better; it's deteriorating.
I think I've definitely got positivity for the future, and I think celebrating the culture we've got and the mining heritage is a good way to sort of build community pride and to teach people that heritage too. So I'll wrap it up there. But thank you, Denis, for talking, and it's been amazing to hear about your own story and the sort of struggles you've had over the years, but how you've persevered, and to learn a bit about Fitzwilliam as a community in Hemsworth.